The cold seeped through the silk of her ruined dress, through her skin, and settled deep in her bones. Rain plastered strands of her hair to her cheeks, each drop a fresh taunt from the city that had once worshipped her. They had called her the Oracle of Industry, the woman with the Midas touch. Lena Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Innovations, the youngest self-made billionaire on the continent. Tonight, she was just a woman shivering on the pavement, her empire reduced to the stinging memory of laughing faces in a glass-walled boardroom. Gideon's face swam in her vision, his smile a predatory slash. "It's just business, Lena," he'd said, the words slick with false sympathy as the security guards flanked him. He, her mentor, her most trusted board member. He had orchestrated the coup with surgical precision, using her own ambition against her, framing her for the very fraud he'd committed. The locks were changed, the accounts frozen, her life deleted. A car door clicked open nearby, a sound so quiet and deliberate it cut through the hiss of the rain. She didn't look up. Probably some good Samaritan about to offer a pitying smile and a useless platitude. She wanted neither. Heavy, expensive footsteps stopped in front of her. The shoes were handmade Italian leather, polished to a black mirror that reflected the distorted city lights. They were immaculate, untouched by the grime of the street she was sitting on. The hem of a black wool overcoat, custom-tailored and impossibly dark, hung just above them. "Get up," the voice was low, a gravelly baritone with an edge of something she couldn't place. Not a request, a command. Lena finally lifted her head, the rain dripping from her chin. She couldn't see his face, hidden in the deep shadows of the waiting car's interior, but the silhouette was all sharp lines and coiled stillness. He was a man who owned the space he occupied. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice a raw whisper. "You are sitting on a wet sidewalk in a $2,000 dress that is now worthless." "You are not fine," he stated. It was a simple assessment of fact, delivered with zero emotion. "Get in the car." A spark of her old fire returned. "I don't know you." "My name is Min," he said, as if that should mean something. "And you are Lena Sterling. You have been publicly executed by your board. Now, for the last time, get in my car." That was the moment the cold in her bones turned to ice. He knew her name, not just the public figure but the woman sitting broken on the curb. How? The question was a sharp, cold prick of fear that was more potent than the rain. She pushed herself to her feet, her body stiff and protesting. The world tilted for a second, a dizzying spiral of streetlights and shame. A hand shot out, steadying her by the elbow. It wasn't gentle. It was firm, possessive, the grip of a man accustomed to taking what he wanted. His fingers were long, the skin warm against her cold, damp arm. The touch was brief, professional, yet it sent a jolt through her system. She looked from his hand to the open door of the black BMW. The interior was a cavern of black leather and polished chrome, smelling faintly of cedar, and something else, something metallic and clean. Survival instinct warred with pride. Pride had gotten her a seat on the pavement. Survival was offering a leather one. Without another word, she slid into the car. The door closed with a heavy, final thud, sealing them in a world of profound silence. The city's noise vanished. The rain became a silent film playing on the tinted windows. He moved around the car and got into the driver's seat. He didn't look at her. He simply drove, his hands sure and steady on the wheel, navigating the rain-slicked streets of the financial district with an unnerving calm. She watched his profile, carved from granite and shadow. A strong jaw, a straight nose, eyes that were fixed forward, reflecting the neon glow of the city. He wore a simple, brutally expensive watch on his wrist. No other jewelry. Everything about him screamed discipline and control. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice steadier now. "Somewhere you will be safe," he answered, his gaze never leaving the road. "Safe from what?" He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. "From the people who took your company." He finally turned his head, and for the first time, she saw his eyes. They were dark, intelligent, and completely unreadable. They are not finished with you. That was the hook. That was the moment she knew this was not a rescue. It was an acquisition. She had just traded one prison for another, and she had no idea what the terms of her sentence were. The mansion was less a home and more a fortress of glass and steel, perched on a hill overlooking the city she had just lost. It was cold, minimalist, and immaculate. Not a single photograph, not one personal touch. It was the home of a man who did not live here, but merely operated. A severe-looking woman in a gray dress met them at the door and took Lena's ruined coat without a word. Min led her into a vast living area with a floor-to-ceiling window that framed the glittering, indifferent skyline. "You will stay here," he said, turning to face her fully. In the light, she could see the faint, silvery line of a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the only imperfection on an otherwise flawless, intimidating face. "Why?" Lena crossed her arms, a futile gesture of defiance. "What do you want from me?" "Gideon Cole and his partners did not just steal your company," Min said, his voice dropping, becoming quieter and more dangerous. "They stole something of mine that was hidden within it. A digital ledger, containing sensitive data. Its recovery is my top priority." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. This wasn't about her. It was never about her. She was a key, a tool. "A ledger? I don't know anything about a ledger." "Perhaps not," he conceded, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But you built the company. You designed its digital architecture. You are the only one who might know the back doors, the ghost protocols where something could be hidden. Or you are the bait I will use to draw Gideon out." There it was. The cold, unvarnished truth. She was either a map or a lure. Her worth was purely functional. "And if I refused to help?" He took a step closer. He was taller than she'd realized, his presence filling the sterile room, making the air feel thin. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The menace was in his stillness. "You seem to be under the impression that you have a choice. Gideon believes you are a loose end. He will not stop until that end is tied. The only reason you are still breathing is because I found you before his men did. So you will help me. And in return, I will allow you to continue to live." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the center of the vast, empty room. The city lights twinkled below, a sea of diamonds she could no longer touch. She was trapped, chained to a man more dangerous than the one who destroyed her, with her life as the currency. She was a billionaire in exile, a queen with no kingdom, and her only ally was a monster who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. The days that followed bled into a routine of luxurious imprisonment. Lena was given a suite of rooms that were larger than her first apartment, with a closet full of clothes in her exact size and a bathroom stocked with expensive, unscented soaps. It was all impersonal, efficient, and deeply unsettling. She ate her meals alone, served by the same silent woman in gray. She saw him only in passing, a dark shape moving down a hallway, the low murmur of his voice from behind a closed office door. He was a ghost in his own house. She spent her time on a secured laptop he provided, poring over the code and schematics of her own company, searching for the digital hiding place he spoke of. It was a bitter pill, dissecting the body of her life's work to find a parasite she hadn't known existed. Every line of code was a memory, every subroutine a monument to a sleepless night. And somewhere in her beautiful, intricate creation, Gideon had planted a cancer. One evening, a week into her confinement, the oppressive quiet of the house was shattered. A sharp, cracking sound echoed from the main floor, followed by a series of muffled thuds. The alarm system did not go off. It was an inside job or professionals who knew how to bypass it. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. Her door was unlocked. She could run, hide. But where? She was on a private, guarded estate. Running would be a death sentence. Her mind, always her sharpest weapon, clicked into place. She wasn't a victim. She was a strategist. She scanned her room, her eyes landing on a heavy glass water carafe on the nightstand. She grabbed it, her hand steady. She crept to her door, pressing her ear against the cool wood. shouted commands in a language she didn't understand, then the unmistakable, sickening sound of a body hitting the floor. They were inside. They were coming. Suddenly, her door swung inward. One of Min's guards, a man she recognized from the front gate, stumbled into her room, a dark stain spreading across his white shirt. He collapsed without a sound. Behind him stood a man in black tactical gear, a silenced pistol raised. Lena didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She acted. With a guttural cry, she swung the heavy carafe, smashing it against the side of the intruder's head. He grunted, stumbling back, disoriented. It wouldn't hold him for long. She turned to run, but another man was already in the doorway, blocking her path. She was trapped. Then, a blur of motion. Min appeared behind the second man, moving with a silent, lethal grace that was terrifying to behold. It wasn't a fight, it was a disassembly. A precise strike to the throat, a twist of the arm, a sharp, final crack. The man crumpled. The first intruder, shaking his head clear, raised his pistol toward Lena. Min crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't bother with the gun. He moved inside the man's guard, his hand a blade that struck the man's wrist, sending the weapon clattering to the floor. The follow-up was too fast to see. The intruder choked, his eyes wide with surprise, before slumping to the ground. Silence descended, thick and heavy, smelling of gunpowder and blood. Min stood in the center of the room, breathing evenly, not a hair out of place on his head. He was dressed in a simple black t-shirt and pants, and there was a shallow gash on his forearm, leaking a thin line of crimson. He looked at the bodies, then at her. His dark eyes swept over her, checking for injuries, his expression unreadable. He took a step towards her. Lena didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her chest rising and falling rapidly, the adrenaline singing in her veins. He stopped in front of her, his gaze dropping to the shattered remains of the glass carafe in her hand. "You should have hidden," he said, his voice quiet. "There was nowhere to go," she replied, her own voice tight. "My only option was to fight." His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in their depths. Not admiration. Something closer to recognition. He reached out and gently took the jagged piece of glass from her hand before she could cut herself. His fingers brushed against hers. A brief, warm contact that sent an electric charge up her arm. He looked at the gash on his own arm, a clean cut from a knife she hadn't even seen. "Come," he said, turning not towards the door, but towards a panel in the wall she'd never noticed before. He pressed a spot, and the panel slid open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase. "We are not safe here." He led her down into a bunker, a sterile white room lined with monitors and medical supplies. He sat on a metal stool, gesturing to a first aid kit on the counter. "Clean it," he ordered. She hesitated for a beat, then opened the kit. Her hands were shaking slightly now that the danger had passed. She took out the antiseptic and a sterile cloth, her movements practiced and efficient. As she dabbed at the cut on his arm, she was aware of his stillness, of the heat radiating from his skin. He watched her, his gaze intense, tracking the movement of her hands. "They knew which room was mine," she said, her voice low. "This wasn't a random assault on your house. They came for me." "I know. Gideon sent them." "Yes." She finished cleaning the wound and began to wrap it with a bandage. His arm was corded with muscle, the skin covered in a faint roadmap of older, paler scars. This was a man whose life was written in violence. "Why?" she asked, looking up at him, her hands still on his arm. "Why go to all this trouble? A ledger can be replaced. There are other ways to get to Gideon." He was silent for a long time, his eyes searching hers. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the things he was not saying. "The woman who was killed," he finally said, his voice rough, as if the words were being torn from him. "The one whose death is detailed in that ledger. She was my sister." His wound. The one vulnerability he carried. It wasn't business. It was blood. He wasn't just a cold, calculating monster. He was a brother seeking vengeance for a woman he had failed to protect. In that moment, seeing the raw, unguarded pain that flashed in his eyes before the mask slammed back down. Everything shifted. She could have used the attack, the chaos, as a chance to escape. But she had stayed. She had fought. And now, she was tending his wounds, listening to his secrets. She had made a deliberate choice to stay, and she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she couldn't go back. The attack changed the air in the house. The quiet stillness was replaced by a tense, humming energy. More guards patrolled the grounds, their presence a constant reminder of the invisible war they were fighting. Min kept her close. She was no longer confined to her suite. She worked in his office, a vast, glass-walled room where he conducted his business. She sat at one end of a massive mahogany desk, and he at the other. She learned to read his silences, to understand the subtle shift in his posture when a call displeased him. She watched him command his empire with a few quiet words, his authority absolute and unquestioned. He moved through his world of violence and secrets like it was a language he was born speaking. And through it all, he watched her. She would look up from her laptop and find his dark eyes on her, his expression a careful blank she was slowly learning to decipher. One afternoon, a message was delivered. Not through a call or an email, but by a brick thrown through the armored glass of the office window. It didn't break the glass, but it left a large, spiderweb crack, a visceral scar on their sanctuary. Attached to the brick was a single photograph. It was of Lena, taken that morning as she stood on her balcony. In the corner of the photo, a date was scrawled, circled in red.
Tomorrow.
He's getting bolder, Lena said, her voice calm despite the cold dread coiling in her stomach. He's not just trying to get in anymore. He's telling you he can reach me whenever he wants. Min stared at the photograph, his jaw tight. He picked up his phone and spoke 2 words into it. Move her. The transfer was supposed to be discreet. A nondescript sedan, a route through the city's less-traveled industrial zones. Lena sat in the back with Min, 2 guards in the front. The silence in the car was thick with tension. He hadn't spoken a word to her since the brick, but she could feel his anger radiating off him like a furnace. It wasn't directed at her, but at his own failure to keep her completely insulated from the threat. It happened at an intersection. A garbage truck blocked the road ahead, and a delivery van boxed them in from behind. It was a classic pincer move. Professional. Men in black tactical gear poured out of both vehicles, armed with automatic weapons. Min's hand shot out, pushing Lena's head down below the window level. Stay down, he commanded, his voice a low growl. The world erupted in a storm of gunfire, the sound of bullets pinging off the armored car like deadly hail. One of their guards in the front seat was hit, slumping against the dashboard. The other returned fire, his shots methodical. Min drew his own weapon, a sleek, black pistol that seemed like an extension of his hand. He fired through the windshield, each shot precise, economical. Lena's mind raced. They were pinned, outnumbered. They needed a new variable. Her eyes darted around the car's interior. On the floor, near the dead guard's foot, lay his phone, the screen cracked but lit. An idea, reckless and dangerous, sparked in her mind. While Min was focused on the firefight to his left, she crawled over the center console, ignoring the flying glass. She snatched the phone. One of Gideon's men was taking cover behind a concrete pillar nearby, shouting orders into his own phone. She saw his screen. He was texting his backup. With trembling fingers, Lena opened the dead guard's messaging app. She found the contact for Min's lieutenant, a man named Jean. She typed a quick, desperate message. Trap at 4th and Industrial. They're calling for backup. Lure them east to the warehouse district. We are heading west. It was a lie. A gamble. But it might split their forces. She hit send. That's when she did something she would never be able to uncross. The soldier behind the pillar was momentarily distracted. Lena saw a discarded piece of rebar on the car floor. She grabbed it, opened the door just a crack, and flung it with all her strength. It clattered against a stack of metal barrels 20 feet away. The soldier instinctively turned toward the sound, and in that split second, Min's gun cracked once. The soldier fell. She had created a diversion. She had actively participated. The line between victim and combatant had just been irrevocably blurred. The remaining assassins, their leader gone, faltered. That was the opening Min's driver needed. He slammed the car in reverse, ramming the van behind them, then wrenched the wheel, speeding down a narrow alleyway. They escaped. Later, in a new, even more sterile safe house, the adrenaline finally receded, leaving Lena shaking. Min stood by the window, his back to her. Jean had called. Her gamble had worked. The backup team had been lured into an ambush. "You should have stayed down," Min said, his voice flat. "You would be dead if I had," she shot back, her fear turning to anger. "They would have overwhelmed you." He turned around slowly. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes held something else. Something raw. "He almost had you. I almost lost you." The admission was stark, stripped of any softness. It was a confession of tactical failure, but it felt like so much more. "You don't get to be angry with me for surviving," she said, her voice shaking. "You dragged me into this world. Don't be surprised when I learn how to live in it." He crossed the room until he was standing directly in front of her, so close she could feel the heat from his body. He looked down at her, his dark eyes intense. "You think this is living?" "It's breathing," she countered, "which is more than Gideon wants for me." That's when the news broke. A trusted contact sent Min a link to an article from a major financial journal. Gideon had leaked a story, complete with fabricated documents, pinning the entire Sterling Innovations fraud on Lena. He was systematically destroying her legacy, salting the earth of her old life, so that nothing could ever grow there again. He wasn't just trying to kill her body, he was murdering her name, her last remaining asset. She looked from a screen to Min's face. The war was no longer his alone. It was hers now, too, and she would not lose. The rage that settled in Lena was a cold, quiet thing. It was the rage of a creator watching her creation be defiled. Gideon hadn't just stolen her company. He was trying to erase her, to rewrite history with her as the villain. She would not allow it. "He has an ego," she said to Min, the words falling like ice chips into the silence of the safe house. "Gideon needs to be seen as the victor. He needs to gloat." Min watched her, his expression guarded. "What are you proposing?" "He thinks I'm broken. A terrified woman in hiding. He won't be able to resist the chance to see it for himself." She held up the burner phone she'd taken from the dead soldier during the ambush. "I'm going to contact him. I'll offer him a trade." "Absolutely not." Min's voice was final, a steel door slamming shut. "Hear me out," she insisted, her gaze unwavering. "I'll tell him I know where your ledger is. I'll say I want to trade it for a clean slate and a flight out of the country. I'll offer him the one thing you want in exchange for the one thing I want. He won't trust it, but his arrogance will make him take the meeting. He'll want to see me admit defeat." "It's a trap," he said flatly. "Yes," she agreed. "For him." She laid out the rest of the plan. The meeting would be at her old headquarters, the Sterling Innovations Tower. Her turf. It would be symbolic for him, the final nail in her coffin. She would wear a wire. She would get him to confess, to boast about how he'd outsmarted her, how he'd arranged for Min's sister's death. His pride would be his downfall. Min listened, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. She saw the war inside him, the strategist recognizing the plan's brutal logic versus the man who had almost lost her once already. "I will be there," he finally said. "My men will be everywhere. The moment he confesses, we move in. But if anything goes wrong, if you deviate by a single word, I am pulling you out." "Understood." "Understood," she said. The next evening, Lena walked back into the lobby of her building. It felt like walking into her own mausoleum. Everything was the same, but it all belonged to someone else now. Gideon's men, posing as security, escorted her to the top-floor boardroom. Her boardroom. Gideon was waiting, standing in front of the massive window that overlooked the city. He looked smug, victorious. "Lena," he said, spreading his arms wide. "I knew you'd see reason." "Cut the theatrics, Gideon," she said, her voice steady. She walked to the head of the table, to the chair that had been hers, but she didn't sit. She remained standing, claiming the position of power. You get the ledger's location. I get a signed confession from your inside man that exonerates me, and a private jet to a non-extradition country. He laughed, a rich, condescending sound. You're in no position to make demands. But I am a sentimental man. Tell me where it is. First, tell me why, she said, her voice dropping, becoming intimate, conspiratorial. You had everything. Why risk it all? Why go after his sister? Gideon's eyes lit up. This was what he wanted. To tell the story. To prove how clever he'd been. Risk, he scoffed. There was no risk. The girl was a problem. She worked in accounting. Too smart, too curious. She found the shell corporations I was using to siphon funds. Funds I needed to stage my little coup, he smiled. Her brother, your new friend, he's a ghost. Untouchable. But she was very, very touchable. Getting rid of her was just good business. He took a step closer to her. And you, Lena, you were the perfect cover. The brilliant, tragic prodigy who flew too close to the sun. It's a beautiful story. And the ledger? She prompted softly. A digital ghost. My one mistake. But now you're going to fix that for me. That's all I needed to hear, she said. That was the signal. The boardroom doors burst open. Min's men, led by Jean, flooded the room, swift and silent. Gideon's guards were neutralized before they could even draw their weapons. Gideon's face went from smug to horrified in a split second. He grabbed a letter opener from the desk and lunged for Lena, pulling her in front of him as a human shield. Stay back, he screamed, pressing the sharp point to her throat. Min entered the room last. He didn't look at his men or at Gideon. His eyes were locked on Lena, a black fire burning in their depths. Let her go, Cole, Min said, his voice dangerously calm. Or you'll what? Shoot through her? Gideon sneered, his panic making him reckless.
Lena met Min's gaze over Gideon's shoulder.
She saw the calculation there, the cold assessment of risk.
She would not be a pawn in this.
She would not be rescued passively. She drove her heel back, hard, into Gideon's instep. He roared in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening she needed. She slammed her head back into his nose with a sickening crunch. He staggered, releasing her. In that moment of chaos, one of Gideon's men, wounded but not out, raised his gun from the floor. He fired. Lena saw the flash, saw Min moving toward her. She acted on pure instinct, shoving him to the side as a searing, white-hot pain exploded in her shoulder. She crumpled to the floor, the sounds of the room fading into a dull roar. The last thing she saw before she blacked out was Min standing over Gideon. There was no mercy in his face, only judgment. When she woke, the world was white and smelled of antiseptic. Her shoulder was a universe of dull, throbbing pain. Min was sitting in a chair by her bed, his dark suit immaculate, a stark contrast to the sterile hospital room. He looked as if he hadn't slept. You're awake, he said. It wasn't a question. Gideon, she whispered, her throat dry. He is no longer a problem. The finality in his tone left no room for questions. A cost had been paid. He stood and walked to her bedside. He looked down at her, at the bandages on her shoulder. He had saved her life, but only after she had saved his. The debt was balanced. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her forehead. It was the most tender gesture she had ever seen from him. The doctor said the bullet missed everything important. His voice was low, laced with a rough, unfamiliar emotion. They were wrong. It hit the only thing that was. It was not a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact, a confession of value. In his world, they were the same thing. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and she saw it then. The acknowledgement, the claim. She was no longer just an asset or a liability. You are my territory now, Lena, he said, his voice a possessive murmur that sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the pain. No one touches what is mine. Weeks later, the bandages were gone, leaving behind a puckered, angry scar on her shoulder.
A permanent remandé.
She stood on the balcony of his mansion, not as a prisoner, but as a resident. The city glittered below, no longer a symbol of what she had lost, but a landscape of possibility. Min came to stand beside her, a silent, powerful presence. He didn't touch her, but she was aware of every inch of him. He placed a new phone in her hand. It was sleek, black, and untraceable. On the screen was a single icon, a newly registered corporation. Her name was listed as the sole proprietor. Below, it was a bank account with a starting balance that had 9 zeros. He had given her back a kingdom, not her old one, but a new one, built on his foundation of shadows and steel. The choice was hers to make, to walk away, to try and rebuild her old life, or to stay, to embrace this new, dangerous world she had survived, to rule a different kind of empire. She didn't look at the phone. She turned and looked at him, at the scar that cut through his eyebrow, at the unreadable depths of his dark eyes. She saw the monster, the killer, the king. And she saw the man who had called her the only important thing in his world. She didn't say a word. She simply leaned in and, for the first time, rested her head against his chest. She felt his arm come around her, a firm, possessive weight that was not a cage, but an anchor. She had made her choice. This was her throne now,